Hi everybody, let's take a look at some of our basic heart anatomy in this video. I've got a couple of different models here that I'll look over. So we'll start right here with an anterior view of the heart. One thing to remember about the heart is that the broad superior aspect is what's called the base. That'll confuse a lot of people because usually the base of most things is going to be the bottom inferior part, but not with your heart. That's the broad superior part, and the apex is this little point down here at the bottom. But looking superficially here from an anterior view, we can see some large structures like the superior vena cava in blue that returns all blood from above the heart into that right atrium, which is located here. Here's our aorta. That is what our big, powerful left ventricle pumps blood into. And from that aorta, that's going to split out into arteries from the top of your head to the tip of your toes. Right here, we have the pulmonary trunk. That's what our right ventricle pumps blood into. That's going to send blood up this pulmonary trunk, through the pulmonary arteries left and right, into the lungs. So here again is our right atrium. Here's our right ventricle, left ventricle. Again, there's the apex. So there's some things we can see superficially. And if we flip it over to the back right here, if we can get it to sit still, here's our left atrium. Notice how you can see it a whole lot better from the back. And here's the inferior vena cava. As that superior vena cava returns all blood from above the heart, inferior returns it from all places below the heart. And then the coronary sinus, seen here on the back, has a hole going into that right atrium, which is blood being returned from the cardiac muscle. So that's the entire body returning blood into that right atrium. But there's our pulmonary veins up here, then our pulmonary arteries here, and then our 4 pulmonary veins there. There's that coronary sinus. And we're going to come back to some of these superficial arteries and veins on the front and back just a little bit further along. So if we can remove this here and open up the heart, here we can see some of the chambers and valves a lot better. Well, look, and here's our right atrium, and here's our right ventricle. In between it's the tricuspid valve, also called the right atrioventricular valve, because it's on the right side and it's in between an atria and a ventricle. But often tricuspid is what you'll hear it called. What looks like little tendon-like strings coming off of these 2 valves here are what's called the Chordae Tendony. And they attach to little finger-like projections of cardiac muscle called papillary muscle. You can see a couple of those over here in this left ventricle. But there's our right atria, tricuspid, right ventricle. Here's our left atrium, and again you can see a lot of it from the back. And right here's the bicuspid valve. Now that could also be called the left atrioventricular valve, or the mitral valve, other names for it. And of course here is our left ventricle. And if we look up under here, there's our aortic semilunar valve right at the base of the aorta. And there's our pulmonary semilunar valve right here at the bottom of the pulmonary trunk. Right here in between the ventricles, there's a wall called an interventricular septum. Well, interventricular, inter means between the ventricles is a wall. And you'd better keep a wall between this right pump of the heart and this left pump. There's also an interatrial septum, but you can't see it on this model right here. But remember, this is blood coming back from the body over here in this right pump. That's low oxygen. Over here on the left side, that's blood coming back from the lungs. That's high oxygen. You don't want to be mixing those 2 blood supplies, right? You want to keep your pulmonary and your systemic circulation separate right there. That's why we need those walls. So if we put our little heart back together right here, while we've got it open, we could also think about the layers to the heart wall. They're not really shown on this model, but remember the epicardium, epi means outer, that'd be the outer superficial layer. So if you're looking at the surface of a heart, your very outer layer is going to be the epicardium. There's a little bit of epithelial tissue and a little adipose tissue, not much there. But then if you look at what makes up almost all of the wall of the heart, it's the very thick middle layer called the myocardium. Myo means middle. Well, that middle layer, myo means muscle. Think of it as that middle layer. Myo, muscle, that's where the cardiac muscle is at. And then to the inside there's an endocardium, another little inner epithelial layer. It has little interconnecting pieces called trabeculae and such. Sometimes you can see them a little bit more in some of the atria, but not really shown in this model. But it's a very smooth inner layer. That smooth inner layer helps that blood to flow easily. But you can still see your superior vena cava, and there's your inferior vena cava down here on the bottom. Can't hardly see yet. There against aorta, pulmonary trunk, and so on. But if we put our little heart back together right here, think about the major arteries and veins that take blood in and out of the cardiac muscle, right? Not the chambers, but the muscle itself. So if we look on the surface of the heart, here's our right coronary artery. You can see it in this groove. There's a groove between the right atrium and right ventricle. That's a coronary sulcus. Sulcus means groove. So there's your right coronary artery. You get over here to the side where you see this little branch coming off here on the side. That's going to be the right marginal artery. It's on the margin, the edge of the heart. And if you continue to go to the back, coming right down the center in red, you can see the posterior interventricular artery. And sometimes that's called the posterior descending because it does descend down the back. But again, we look at this, there again's right coronary. Then on the edge, we got the right marginal. To the back, posterior interventricular, also posterior descending, if somebody likes that right there. That's 3 of our big arteries that take blood to the cardiac muscle. Now, back behind this pulmonary trunk, you'd find the left coronary. You can't see it. It's behind this stuff. But the left coronary has a big branch coming right down the front of the heart called the anterior interventricular, sometimes called the anterior descending. Again, notice how there was a posterior interventricular on the back, anterior interventricular on the front. But if we go over to the side right here in red, there's a circumflex artery, and then coming right down the edge is the left marginal. Just as there was a right marginal over here on this edge, there's a left marginal over here on this one. So let's look at those one more time in pairs, right? We do have a couple of coronary arteries. There's your right coronary, left one you can't see. Here's our anterior interventricular on the front, posterior interventricular on the back. There's our right marginal artery on this side, left marginal over here on the left side. And then again, the circumflex is right up here in between them in this region shown right in here. So that's the 7 big arteries that are taking blood in to that cardiac muscle. Now there's 3 veins that take blood out of that cardiac muscle. Here in blue, we have the great cardiac vein. Great, that's the biggest one because it's draining blood out of the left ventricle, which is the biggest chamber by far with the most muscle in it. So that is our great cardiac vein. Over here to the side, we've got the small cardiac vein, and then to the back, we've got the middle. So there is a great, small, and middle cardiac vein. And then this large thing in blue right here where my thumb is at is the coronary sinus. All the blood from the cardiac muscle drains into that coronary sinus, and that's actually a 3rd inflow of blood into this right atrium. They don't actually show it. Maybe this little depression here is supposed to be it, but there should be a 3rd inflow into that area.